All right. Greetings and welcome back. Once again, this is Amuna, and I pray everybody is doing well. I know we have been a bit delayed on this done. Queenie, welcome to the conversation. Let me go ahead and double check. There has been a lot going on, so I hope you are doing well. I was supposed to go live earlier, but I'm here now, right? So let me go ahead and get in. This is part two. So if you missed part one, go ahead and check it out. I am reading from Birth of a White Nation, the invention of white people and its relevance today. So yes, Queenie, I am on now. All right, so we are on page 12. The link for this book is in the box. And you can go ahead and check that out, as well as the ways in which you can support the channel. I said, let me say that earlier, because sometimes I get into stuff and I don't go there. But let's start. So the last time we were having this conversation, we were looking at the historical narrative as we were reading the book by Jacqueline Battalora, and she's giving some references to American history and the development of American history and what was actually happening in the early 1600s. And now we are looking at why they began to invest in changing laws to control the narrative and control the people, right? So we're up to the anti-miscegenation law. It says anti-miscegenation law, advancing that would become, quote, racial restrictions on marriage, saw the intervention of the category, quote, white, reflecting a distinct group of people. So earlier it was that there were more males coming over, and there were more European males of different nationalities, but there were also African males coming over. And there was a 7-to-1 ratio, according to the books, of men to women. And so the males, both black and white, were said to be marrying European women. Now, this became a problem as the colony went on, because as we know, when they first tried to populate the colony, it didn't work. So they were just replacing people as they died off. But once it started to show that the venture had some type of validity, they started, marrying and giving in marriage and populating the colony. It says these laws prohibited white persons from marrying specific categories of people seen not as white. Such mixing would eventually be called miscegenation, and the laws that prohibited such relations would be referred to as anti-miscegenation laws. So again, when it's like, oh, look, the crown, it's becoming viable, and we have to talk about, all of this mixing that's going on, right? Because if there weren't a mixing going on, why would you need anti-mixing laws? Yeah. It goes on to say, the crime of miscegenation was shaped and reshaped over time in response to and as a reflection of political, economic, ethical, psychological needs and desires of British ruling elite as they interacted with and responded to the free Europeans of the colonies. Because again, they're not the first ones over here. They're not the first ones who are amongst African Americans or Africans coming to the West. Remember, they're 200 years deep. The Portuguese have been doing it, Spanish have been doing it, the French have been doing it, and the British is like, we're not going to do it like that, darling. Absolutely not. Okay? We won't be mixing. So anyway, the creation of this new body of crime called miscegenation created a criminal that did not steal goods or inflict physical violence. So they had to make this thing. This is in the laws. We're talking about the invention of a white people, according to this text. And welcome to the conversation, everybody who's just joined us. And the fact that now this is becoming something that is illegal. We are on page 12 of Birth of a white nation. What I read from before was the intro, which was available on Amazon, but I didn't even check to see if you guys could read along with me. If not, you're just going to be looking at this here on the screen. Yeah, you guys are going to just be looking around on the screen for now. Let's continue. No law stands alone. So they're like, let's get in here. Like we read earlier about the status of the child now following the mother. That came after, it's called Parta Secutor Patrum. That came after after 1662 suit of a black woman who sued and won for her freedom because her mother was black, quote unquote, but her father was white. And so they were like, oops, let's make sure that doesn't happen again. All right. And so they they changed the laws, right? Let's continue. Where are we here? No law stands alone. Legislation comes about largely because lawmakers perceived a deficiency in existing laws as they interact with cultural practices and or social change. It does not make sense for lawmakers to go through the trouble of crafting and then passing legislation unless it addresses a need or desire. Exactly. Something had to be going on in order for you to write. Is even when you look at the laws for certain things in this country at the turn of the century, right? You'll look at the drug laws or the marijuana laws. You look at, there's something going on culturally that then they begin to go into these places. And I said it the other day, if you look at, not even has to be drugs, you look at telecommunications and you look at the laws that they had to now start to pass to break up monopolies in certain commercial industries. You always see that this culture or whatever is happening, they run in front of it to try to govern it and then create laws. It's the same thing that happened with the laws for not teaching a slave to read and write, right? They began to run ahead of what was the what do you call it again? My mind just blank. See, it was late. I've been doing a lot today. They went ahead of the Queenie, welcome to the conversation. They went of not the prohibition. It's late. They ran ahead of those who were advocating against slavery, the long definition. And they did not want the abolitionists mercy. I was doing health and diabetes all day today, and now I can't think straight. But they wanted to go ahead of the abolitionists and try to counter a lot of what was happening during that time because they were printing a lot. They were putting out a lot of pamphlets. They were, riling up the good Negroes, and they didn't want the good Negroes to be reading this stuff. So they started to craft these laws and put heavy penalties for teaching. It wasn't people just say, oh, they just, they didn't want slaves reading and writing. No, it came a time where they felt it was more detrimental to the institution of slavery for the slave to know how to read and write because of what was happening during that time. And what was happening was the big push for abolition, right? But let's continue. So that's the same thing that's happening at this point. It says, what was the need to address or desire served by the first law in which, quote, white referencing a group of humanity appears? In order to explore this question, we must first understand some things about this body of law. Again, this is the second installment. So if you missed the first, you could go and listen and then go back to the first so you could be all caught up, because I'm addressing this as it relates to conversations that we've had on this channel about blackness, quote unquote, and whiteness, quote unquote, and why I'm averse to this very blanket terminology, right? And why sometimes we miss each other in conversations. So anti-miscegenation law references those laws that impose restrictions upon marriage that prohibited a member of a group understood by lawmakers to be superior from marrying a person of the opposite sex who was a member of a group they believed to be inferior. These laws, for example, prohibited a quote unquote white person from marrying a person of African descent. Remember what we read earlier is that they were doing this when they first got here, right? This was happening when they first got here. Not only that, if the black woman, if she was here and was impregnated by a white man, European man, he would be responsible for the child. So when they started to, this is why American enslavement has a different flavor, quote unquote. It has a different tone because of the laws that were set in place, opposed to the laws in Brazil, opposed to the laws in Haiti, opposed to the laws in Jamaica, in the Caribbean. It's a different set of laws that they started to enact. Let's continue. Like the human category, quote unquote, white, anti-miscegenation law was an invention of North American colonists and reflects a dynamic interaction of gender relation, social control measures, and economic and power gaining opportunities with the colonial context. Within the colonial context, basically, it was moving the goalposts. There's like, hey, man, you know what I mean? The crown gave us some money to come over here and run this thing, and we got to make sure this power stays concentrated. The little resources, the little 1, 2 woman them were there. Now they're going over there with this guy. You know what I'm saying? And next thing you know, they can't bring more of those who are going to take over the thing. So they're trying to secure and make sure that the power stays concentrated in the hands of those who they desire to be in. This arena of law provides an important entranceway into the invention and evolving understanding of the category of white, quote unquote, and the role of law in the inventive enterprise. Why, the author asks? I know me ask why, the author said why? Because examining anti-miscegenation law provides a number of insights. First, it helps inform the parameters that influence those thought to be quote unquote white. So when I say quote unquote, it's not just this book I've read this in. I say it with intention. It's not like I don't know what I'm. Why should keep on saying quote unquote? Let me drink a bit of my thing. Hold on there. For those who just joined us, welcome. I know I was supposed to deliver this one like 4 days ago. Monday, I know. It says, second, it reveals meanings that were predicated to this new group of humanity. Third, because anti-miscegenation law pre-existed the first use of the human category, quote unquote, white in law, and because anti-miscegenation law served as a site of significance to the new category. This area of law is insightful to the inventive effort itself, helping to answer the, quote, why white question. And this is also speaking to the conversation we had about it being a social construct. And conversely, quote, black is also a social construct, right? We go make it up and then now everybody are going to believe and agree, said this is what we mean when we say this, right? Anti-miscegenation law was never derived from the statutory laws of antiquity, nor from common law of England, but was a creation of colonial North America. And this is why later on we're going to see that America starts to rebel, 1776, brush off the fetters of the crown and decide to do its own thing, right? Anyway, shot with it now. It says here, but was a creation of colonial America. It was in an environment wherein marriageable women were in short supply, and the location of power within marriage was held almost exclusively by the husband, that the first anti-miscegenation law was enacted. It's like, wait a minute, without Pickney and more people coming, then this thing could get shaky real quick if the man the husband is the one who has all the power in the household. The woman can't vote, she can't own land, she has to have a man to be able to work through to do anything within society. And therefore, if this man is the heavily melanated man, it's going to be a problem. Leah, welcome to the conversation, right? So they sitting there like, it says here, it was an environment wherein marriageable women were in short supply, and the location of power within marriage was held almost exclusively by the husband, that the first anti-miscegenation law was enacted. In this statute, a British woman and an African man were being portrayed as members of sufficiently different human groups to require the enactment of a marriage prohibition. Sorry, prohibition. Lit. Yo, them say, Bridget, a different human group, brother. We have to make up something because I don't know. It's a different human group, cross species, right? The Colonial Assembly of Maryland in 1664 enacted a law that punished a woman who was, quote, English or freeborn, who married a black slave. The law stated in part. So let's go ahead and look this law up right quick, yeah? So I can share my screen. So we can look at this thing. This is important. For some, not so much. But for those who want to move through and don't get itch on semantics and kind of get a backdrop, yeah, it's important. Rolande. All right, let's look a little bit about this. This is Maryland. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. I'm gonna read what she said, and then we're gonna look a little bit on this thing. Let's look at some of their laws, shall we? So this is, every time they're like, what we gonna do about this? Make up a law. What we gonna do about that? Make up our next law. What we gonna do about this? All right. So we're going to read a little bit about that, but I'm going to read what she put concerning the anti-miscegenation. It says, what is this? Unation, whereof for deterring such English and freeborn women from such shameful matches. So, whatsoever freeborn woman shall intermarry with any slave or Slav shall serve the master of such Slav during the life of her husband, and that all the issue of such freeborn women so married shall be slaves as their fathers were. But remember, they were also bringing other Europeans here as slaves, as indentured servants. Welcome to those who just joined us, right? They were also bringing other Europeans here as slaves and indentured servants. Right? So what they're saying is to deter the woman, the European woman, the English woman, the genteel woman from breeding with such people, right? They were like, cool. If you do that, you're going to serve his master too. So basically, you gave up your freedom to go and be a slave. And the children that's born, if their fathers is a slave, then they're a slave. And conversely, if their father is free, then they are free, right? Let's look at some of this. But we know that in a little bit, Virginia, the colony, changes that when when they get sued, when old boy gets sued. But freedom of bondage. So this is some of the interesting stuff of the beginnings of this country, right? It's saying that although Maryland colonists practiced Negro slavery as early as 1640s, they didn't legislate it until 1664. So like 20 years later, before they start putting in this legislation. There were several reasons why the first slave law would have should have come at the particular time. Perhaps the most important was rapidly rising numbers of Africans in the colonies. In 1640, the Black population had been a mere 20 individuals in a non-Indian population of 600. In 1660, the number of Blacks had risen to 760 out of 8,500. So they're like, oops, you know what I mean? They're taking all the women's, I suppose. So it says, thus the 2 decades, the ratio of Blacks to whites had narrowed from 1 in 30 to 1 in 10. So it's always been a threat. The African American were a more visible element in society than they had formerly been. Furthermore, by 1660, Maryland was firmly committed to a tobacco staple economy that demanded an abundance of cheap labor. Go figure. After the first serious tobacco depression, the result of Navigation Act 1660, economic conditions in the colony favored those investors with considerable capital who commanded large labor forces. So basically, they were like, "Oh, we need some cheap labor, bring it in." Like they have been like today, you know what I mean? Like Springfield, Ohio. You understand what I'm saying? So the specific issue that prompted 1664 law, however, was the problem of baptized Blacks who claimed their freedom. Because there was before they were like, oh, if you convert to Christianity, if you're a Christian, then they couldn't by law enslave you, right? The lower house of assembly outlined, this is before, this is when they first started to try to come over and quote evangelize the people. It says it is desired by the lower house that the upper house would be pleased to draw up an act obliging Negroes to serve durant vita, they thinking it very necessary for the prevention of damage that the masters of such slaves may sustained by such slaves pretending to be Christian, and so plead the law of England. So again, there was a loophole in what or who they were willing to enslave. So but we're gonna continue because we over here on the marriage thing. Let's read a few more and then I'm gonna go back to the book. The lower house clearly recognized Black slavery as a prior practice and implied that race distinction should be sole criterion for its continuance. So it jumped from remember before they were saying where you were from, if you was Muslim or Christian or otherwise, right? If you was slave or free. Now they're saying solely based on your skin, that should be the criteria of slavery, huh? Like, let's just make it easy. The ones who stick out, that's them. Let's see here. It says it also recognized that such policy would be a direct conflict with English law, but justified it on the grounds that a valuable source of labor was at stake. The law, as finally adopted, had 4 provisions, which may be summarized as follows. And then we're going to go back to the book. All Negroes or slaves. You see how they just kind of just merged that right there? All Negroes or slaves. Just went ahead and put that together. Whether already in the province or in the imported later, were to serve durante vita. Durante vita sound like somebody from around the way. Durante vita, fam? And we're going to get the exact meaning. So this is where they put into law during life. Interesting. That's what durante vita means. During one's life. So perpetual servitude, eh? Remember, they were using Europeans of the quote lower class to get their work done. But now all Negroes or other slaves, whether already in the province or to be imported later, were to serve for their entire life. So they're no longer letting you get off early. Interesting. And they wrote that into law. So then all of a sudden it became so. All children born of any Black or other slave were to be slaves as their fathers. This was before the law gets changed when they got sued because the European men was over there visiting Kizzy at night. Okay. 3, to discourage Dives freeborn Englishwomen. This is the one that was just the outtake from the book, who forgetful of their free condition. Back in the day, They talk about people can't spell. Back in the day, I've read some of these journals. Yeah, they were spelling however that word sounded. That's how they were spelling. And to the disgrace of our nation. So they was like, woman, you have betrayed your people. Okay, you have forgotten who you are. It says, married slaves, thus inconveniencing courts and masters with legal debates over the status of the offspring. Any free woman so marrying after the act's passage was to serve her husband's master during her husband's lifetime. Be like, oh, so you like him? Oh, you want to marry him? Cool. You're going to be a slave till homie dies. To further discourage such marriages, the children of matches contracted after the acts passed were to be slaves as their fathers were. The children of such marriages contracted before the acts were to serve their parents' masters until they reached the age of 31. They pulled that out of their behind. 31, where did you get that from? Like, you just pulled that out of nowhere? Like, where are we going with this? Thank you, Leah. Correct. That's why we're looking at it. Leah says, insightful illustration of how race is a social construct for the power structures economic security. Exactly. That's why we're going over it. As you saw, we were having that conversation before, and I thought it was a great time to, look over this, provide a reference, and we could continue to have the discussion. It's a great illustration because that's exactly how it happened. It says the irony, they were okay with their infants feeding from Negro women's breasts. Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. That's the dichotomy. You're holding these two. You see, you have to hold one thought process to justify what you're doing. Like humans, to a certain degree, according to psychologists, that's where you have to justify it. You don't want to know, you feel like you're doing wrong. It's like, I'm doing this because. So they said they're doing this because they're two different human species. And Thomas Jefferson said he's doing it because, Negroes don't feel pain. And they're not like white people, and they don't need sleep. So when the slave master was like, okay, you don't get to sleep, you get 2 hours of sleep, 3 hours of sleep for the night, it's okay because you're a Negro and you don't need sleep. I mean, homie tried to, I don't want to go off the topic, but yeah. Yeah. So let's continue. For those who just joined us, welcome to the conversation. Where are we? So those were the laws. They were like, yeah, shorty. Oh, you want to go over there? No problem. Stay over there. And your children going to stay over there too. And they quickly changed their mind, AKA moved the goalposts. So this was in Maryland, right? 1664. But they moved the goalposts in the other colony of Virginia when they said this here. When they quoted that the status of the child should follow the mother, right? So when the father became a concern, the black man was a concern, then they put laws into effect so that the so-called white woman or the English woman wouldn't get with him. And then when the children of the black woman was a concern, then they passed laws to absorb the European man and condemn the woman and the child. Very, very curious. Let's continue. Wait, let me just read a little bit right here. This was a sweeping law. The first provision recognized only two clear and fundamental criteria for enslavement: a black skin and residency in Maryland. So it went from debtor slave, it went from you owe me something, it went from an agreement, it went from all of those things to you just needed to be black and live here. And then that's what that meant. Now you got to prove otherwise. Where your papers at? It says it did not distinguish between free blacks and slaves, thereby firmly establishing in law the presumption that all blacks were slaves. So these things are written into law. It's going to now shape the culture. It's going to shape the perception of society, those in society. And those things are still here today. If you see someone walking down the street with a hoodie that fits the description, the presumption is they're criminal. Guilty until proven innocent, although it says innocent until proven guilty, but that's not what happened, much like these laws. And this is very early on. It says, nor did it incorporate religious exemptions because, as we have seen, the law's major purpose was to clear the way for holding Black Christians in perpetual bondage. The second provision specified the inheritability of slave status by paternal descent. Apparently, the offspring of unmarried Black men and white women, as well as the offspring of any white man and Black women, were to be free. The third and fourth provisions sought to deal with the, quote, disgrace, end quote, of marriages between Black male slaves and free-born English women, and to provide a standard for determining the status of the children of mixed marriages. Early on, the melanated man was a threat socially to the establishment. And this has continued to be until this day. It was 300, 400 years later. Let's continue. Let me continue this book. Very curious. Let me drop this link in the box if anybody interested in continue to peruse this here portion. Uh-oh. My computer better not cut off. Do. All right, let's continue. We get like a background in it, so let's continue here. It says, while Maryland law did not void the marriage, it did legislate harsh consequences for the woman who entered into it and to any children of the couple. She faced life service to the master of her husband for the duration of her husband's life, while any children of the couple were rendered slaves. And this also creates a little issue too, because if she no longer, welcome to those who just joined us, if she no longer wants to be a slave, right? And she don't really like dude that much no more. This is a bad setup. I mean, like, you a slave as long as he's alive. Like, that's not a good setup, not in my mind. Like, what are we doing? Anyway, it says here, while any children of the couple were rendered slaves. In these ways, the laws worked as a deterrent to these marriages, the expressed intent of the law. However, prevention and deterrence were not the only forces at work. Like, they had to put, like, you better go over there and get with John. You know what I'm saying? Why are you trying to marry Raheem? You can't marry Raheem, Becky. You know what I mean? They were not pleased. You will not be marrying Raheem. For slave owners, there were incentive to encourage English or other free-born women to enter into marriages with enslaved African men. The law worked to enlarge their slaveholdings by adding not only the new bride, but also any children the couple might have. So they were like, listen, the slave owner was like, me no know what them I said in a government, you know. But Raheem tell me to tell you, say, him like your hair do. Why? Because the slave owner was like, psh, not only is he going to get Raheem, he's also going to get Becky and all their children. So they're saying here, or the author is saying, that they had a vested interest in encouraging this type of behavior. Right? It says here, as a result, there was encouragement for slaveholders to promote these marriages, the enemy within. And who are the slaveholders? More Europeans. They was like, I don't know why those dudes up there making these type laws. Because remember, at this time, the importation was still a large amount of African men, and not so much the women. They didn't go for the women and children until later on. So even the importation, the statistics among those who have been imported changed over time. So in the beginning, they were like, oh, somebody dead, then we just get somebody else. Why not? Right? So they were bringing more labor than they were thinking about long-term longevity. So they were like, okay, if Samantha is the only one here, then bro, you need to get with Samantha because homie need to build up his stable. Crazy stuff. This is crazy work right here. In 1681, the Maryland Assembly corrected for the conflicting messages within the Maryland enactment of 1664. So some 20 odd years later, they're like, oops, no, sir, we have to go change this thing because it don't look like them might get where we are trying to say. The 1681 enactment will be discussed later in the chapter. If you just joined us, welcome, press like on your way in. Now, what can see I've gone now. Game says yes, because it's the law for children of Black women to inherit the father's belonging. They didn't want that. But yeah, they didn't want that. They did not want that. That's why they changed the law. They was like, oops, this is causing a problem. Because, old boy can't control himself after dinner. So now you got all of these Creole children popping up, these mixed race children popping up who can claim their father's land, their father's whatever. They were like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Leah says that her husband is from the lower western shore of Maryland. Interesting. Maryland, we understand Maryland, Virginia, all of these places are the early places where a lot of this stuff was going down. So we're on page 14 for those who just joined us. Birth of a White Nation, the invention of white people and its relevance today. We're exploring the social construct of race in America, okay? If you missed part 1, just go and ease yourself, listening, and then you can catch up with part 1 after we're done. It says, the 3 areas of colonial law discussed above that stand in opposition to British law are highlighted here because they provide important legal context for the emergence of quote-unquote white people. So America didn't just 1776 fireburn. We're not giving no tax, and we got Boston Tea Party. They've been, since they came over here from the very beginning, it was like, you know what? We're gonna break a little bit from this thing, They started to one to change laws until they finally decide for loose the bands. You understand? So it says here they were different. They were in opposition to British law. The invention of quote-unquote white people in law represents a moment in time when a line is drawn in the sand. It represents a linguistic divide separating those who are within it from those excluded from it. While, quote, Negro, end quote, and Indian, quote unquote, already serve to separate and divide, quote, white people sharpen those divisions by erasing division within and among British and Europeans of the colonies. So it's like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We got to stick together, like erase all this so they don't know who is who, right? I didn't like you before, Scottish man, French man, you know what I mean, whatever man. But today, we're going to have a problem on our hands if we don't come together. To me, that's what I imagine. They were like, if we don't do something soon, the Negroes are taking all of the suitable women. Do you know what I saw the other day? Let's continue. It's right with it. At the same time, it represents a need or desire and reveals a commitment in the colonies to a particular version of capitalism that stands in opposition to a shared sense of humanity and in opposition to the quote-unquote family in favor of human hierarchies and cruel extensions of labor. These colonial laws also laid a foundation for a division of humanity that would be accelerated by the invention of white people. And for those who may think this may be some type of racist, race baiting, I did not write this book. This book is written by a woman named Jacqueline Battalora from Edinburgh, Scotland. You can definitely check it out. She holds a PhD from Northwestern University and has been engaged in anti-racist training since the 1990s. She's a lawyer and a professor of sociology and criminal justice at St. Xavier University. And I'm a history. Me just I read it. Okay? It says, we could continue. The laws are important in part because they are contrary to British common law and therefore suggest needs and desires particular to the colonial North American context. But the question remains, whose needs and desires, and we don't know, it's a rhetorical question. A law may reflect the sentiment of some, most of, or few of the people in the community. It is fairly obvious that the law rendering the status of a child dependent upon the status of the mother, and the law that imposed additional years of service for child born during one's years of bond servitude, served the interests of those invested in plantation labor and worked against the interests of the masses of the laborers, right? What is often missed is that these extensions of law or labor also harmed European and African farmers who were free of servitude, because it is hard to compete with the farmer who has free labor. And that's also just to bring up that there were people here. There were people like, there was a black man and he didn't have a farm. Yes, that because there were people here that were free and who was into the business of the time, the entrepreneurial adventure of the time, which was farming, right? Was it the majority? No, but there were people who did. I'll continue. Large landholders who extended years of servitude among servants without pay could produce more for less. We still see that today. They go to countries that could produce more for less. We see the conditions in some of these factories where they produce materials, where they produce goods, where they produce clothing. There was actually something I was watching. Oh, this show on, what's the name of that channel? Can't remember. But a show named Contraband that follows these Department of Homeland Security people to police, to the best of their ability, the goods and services that are coming into the country. And they gave a statistic that more than 95% of what is bought and sold in this country is imported. Let that sink in. Huh? That's another story for another day. Okay? That is another story for another day. Let's continue. So anyway, they were like, yo, we can't compete. It says, just what, like, you can't compete. That's why they say, oh, black people, entrepreneur prices are too high. I'm sorry. How you competing with Walmart? How can you compete when can you compete with these big box stores when they're the ones who have the direct link, when they're the ones who can buy in bulk, when they're the ones who can afford to sell it cheaper because they are like the large landholders of yesteryear? How can you compete? There's a middleman in your equation, and therefore the prices are higher because the cost of doing business is more, right? What about the law that punished a British or free-born woman who married a slave or African descent? Does this law reflect a widely held belief that the people were in need of separation, especially English women from black men? There is a wealth of information, some of which has been previously noted, that suggests that the lawmakers' sentiments regarding the impropriety of, quote, English and other freeborn women marrying black slaves were not shared by the masses in the colonies. So they was like, that's them up there. We don't agree. They was over there at the speakeasy, but there wasn't no speakeasy. Yeah, you can't compete. There wasn't a speakeasy back then, but on the ground, they wasn't trying to hear that. That's what I'm receiving from what she is saying. For those who just joined us, welcome. We're almost this close. I have a little bit more to read until we get to Baker's Rebellion, but we do see them setting the tone. We do see them setting the tone for what is the race relations in America today, right? So people are like, why can't we get over the original sin of the country? Because has it really been addressed? Has the original sin really been addressed? These people don't, you just look and see what we see today and then kind of like brush over all of the things that were actually in the fabric. It's woven into the fabric of, as we see here, the legal system. This is why civil rights had to be a whole thing, because what was into the fabric of it? You had no rights. Creating difference in law. We're on page 15 for those who have just joined us. The link, I believe I put the link. Hold up. Wait a minute. For those who just joined us, let me go ahead and run this commercial real quick. Let me make sure I put my links in the box. If you would like to support the channel, I got a new little commercial for you. We already know what to do to support the channel. Like, subscribe, and share. That is free. But if you want to support the work beyond all of the information, all of the knowledge, the deep research that I drop, my passion is giving back to the community, educating on all fronts. And I have this campaign up. If you would like to support, scan the GoFundMe so that I can bring these health education classes to children in the state. Also, if you just want to go ahead and be like, I just want to cash app you, go ahead and cash app the Yummy Cottage, the Yummy Cottage. And again, PayPal for those like, I don't have PayPal or I don't have Cash App. Listen, you can Cash App it, PayPal, or you can just go over to the yummycottage.com and we have a donate button there as well. In addition to that, you already know, published author, go onto Amazon and purchase a book. Purchase Island Twist. Purchase Angry Black Woman Syndrome Revisited. You can purchase a book, gift it to a loved one, and those are all of the ways that you can support the channel. Thank you for tuning in. Now, let's get back to the story. All right, I come back now. I have to get better on the ways in which I can share to support because I do put a lot of energy and effort out there and I'm getting better. I'm getting better. So definitely the links are in the description below. But let's continue. Creating difference in law. I'm going to read this and then the next time we come through, we're going to talk about Baker's Rebellion. Okay? All right. The degree of similarity of treatment between those of African descent and those who would become quote unquote white prior to 1680 in Virginia and Maryland and up to 1800s in other areas is well established. And then she gives her references. There is also evidence of different treatment. It is in those areas where treatment was not similar that clues might be found to help explain the emergence of the human category, quote unquote, white. Evidence of different treatment is not reviewed here because it overshadows the evidence that Europeans and Africans engaged in relationships of trust and mutuality. It does not. Rather, it is important in order to make visible the process that eventually gave rise to the social and legal change in the colony that dramatically altered those relationships of mutuality, cooperation, and trust between persons of African and European ancestry. Now, again, thank you, Leah. Definitely send this link out to loved ones. It may help someone in their search along the way. Definitely. So the way the author is presenting it is like it was kumbaya. This is what I'm getting from what she's presenting. I'm not saying I agree with 100%. I'm just looking at the veracity of the histography. Okay, if histography is the correct word to use, but she's like, yo, it was kumbaya, and everybody on the ground was just, like they were going to the factory, and everybody was in it together. And it was the people at the top who was like, I don't think I like this. We're gonna have to break this up, hon. Okay. It says, for example, the experience of coming to the colonies was different. European bond laborers entered contracts for their labor and traveled without literal chains across the Atlantic. So again, you do have people like, their people were Scottish and they were enslaved. Yeah, bruh, but you didn't come here in chains. You volunteered. And sometimes they didn't, because sometimes it was debt slavery, right? Like you was going on the ship. Not in necessarily change in the whole of the ship, but you ain't necessarily have a choice. The journey took between 8 to 12 weeks and was difficult. That is a long 8 to 12 weeks, 3 months journey, 2 to 3 months journey on the water. Indentured servants were packed into the hull of the ship with little or no fresh air and were given a ration of bread every 2 weeks. In contrast, African laborers, no, don't say laborers, enslaved peoples, were exclusively stolen people forced through the Middle Passage in chains under grueling conditions. I'm not going to split hairs with you on that one. I'm going to keep going. Winthrop Jordan highlights another way in which Africans were set apart from British and Europeans generally, the label quote unquote Negroes. Similarly, and native tribal members were set apart from the English, not only by the word Indians, but by their treatment. Another example of differential treatment can be seen when in 1640, the Virginia General Court pronounced the sentence for 3 servants who temporarily escaped. The Dutchman and the Scot, because that's how they used to call them from their country of origin, were ordered for 4 additional years of service, while the third, a Negro, shall serve his master or his assigns for the time of his natural life. So 3 people escape: a Dutchman, a Scottishman, and a so-called Negro. You notice how the Dutchman and the Scottishman have countries of origin? This is 1640, so they started with the foolishness early. But the Negro, stripped of all of his country of origin, just his complexion is referenced, he gets to be a perpetual servant. It says here, and to this, the Maryland miscegenation law of 1664 and the Virginia fornication law of 1662, wherein lawmakers doubled the fine imposed for sexual intimacy outside of marriage when one party was English or Christian and the other party was Negro. Huh? Now hold up. Let's look up the Virginia fornication law. Hold on. Y'all ready? If y'all new here, y'all know I had to go look that one up. Because she not even giving me the full quote. Hold on. For the law of 1662. I don't remember. I possibly may have looked it up in times past, but let me see something here. Let's see how much they was getting charged for the how much they was getting charged for this here. Let's take a look, shall we? Hold on, let me share my screen. Here we are. Let me take this off so you can take a gander. Here we are. This is the yo, man, history is something else. This is the Negro women's children to serve according to the condition of the mother. So remember, we read that they began to change it, but we're looking for the Virginia fornication law. Okay. Negro women's children to serve according to the condition of the mother. No, this is the other one. Whereas some doubts have arisen whether the children gotten by an Englishman upon a Negro woman shall be slave or free, be it therefore enacted. By whom? Like I declare me, like be it therefore enacted and declared by this present grand assembly, like I just made it up, that all children born in this country shall be held bond or free, only according to the condition of the mother. And that's also what goes on today. So a lot of people who end up in court and they're like, oh, the women have more rights. It's still in law today. This is what is being experienced. The child is after the condition of the mother, and the father has to come in now and legally pursue his rights, right? It says here that all children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the condition of the mother, and that if any Christian shall commit fornication. So this is also excluding the fact that the Christian could be a quote unquote Negro, because the assumption is that the Christian is what? European. And if any Christian shall commit fornication with a Negro man or woman, he, 2 E's, or she, 2 E's, so offending shall pay double the fines imposed by the former act. So if they catch you If you pop out with one baby, when not look like how the baby supposed to look. Eh? This is so interesting. Laws of Virginia, Act number 12. Curious. Let's continue, peoples. For those who've just joined us, welcome to the conversation. Wagwan Kaya. Yep. Wasn't it said that the European men wanted? Yes, but this law, remember, they're not only trying to, there's so, I think the goalpost is moving as things continue to develop, right? Again, after they done got the Indians for all of their knowledge of how to survive here, they were in it's the early part of the company, because it is a company, right? It's the growing pains of the company. And as things begin to evolve, they begin to move things around so that it can fit what they need in order to succeed. So, yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting right there. Let's continue. We're on page 16. It says here, so the assumption is that the Christian is European, and if the man or the woman, they're going to pay a fine, right? I don't know what the fine is. They didn't go into the fine. I'm not going to go off. I'm not going to go off course here. Okay, let's continue. Hold on, I'll try to see. All right, make we continue. So, yeah, make we continue. There are all kinds of distinctions among and between people reflected in laws, such as a plaintiff and a defendant, leaser and a lessee, victim and accused, buyer and seller, to mention just a few. What makes the distinctions noted in law above so noteworthy is that they are distinctions that the invention of white people presumed and worked to accelerate and sharpen. The Maryland and Virginia laws noted above reveal that during the 1660s, within the arena of sexuality and marriage, persons of African descent and members of native tribes were being constructed by lawmakers, though not by masses or laborers, as sufficiently unlike the British so as to justify what was at the point an ethnic-based marriage prohibition and different, more harsh treatment in the law. Similarly, the dramatic sex imbalance that existed in Maryland could very well have been a motivating force for the anti-miscegenation law in that colony, rather than animus towards Black Africans. I mean, it could be both. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. It could be both. It could be both. It says, however, legal descriptions within the enactment of 1664 suggest the emergence of an understanding of human difference between those viewed as like the British on the one hand and who were seen as superior, and on the other hand, those viewed as clearly not like the British who were seen as inferior. Let me jump down here. So she goes over that. Let me jump down. Because she kind of repeats herself sometimes. It says in Virginia law, a law was enacted in 1640 that prohibited those of African descent from possessing firearms. However, the law appears to have been ignored and unenforced. This 1640 enactment is noteworthy because it suggests a very early sign of a desire on the part of lawmakers to treat Africans in an inferior manner. It is equally noteworthy that this effort was apparently rejected by the community. She keeps saying that. I don't know why she keeps saying that. So Leah says basically they made up race relations laws according to what the power structure needed to be correct. Because if we're thinking about it as it is a corporation, right? We're thinking about it as a business, and this is the beginning of the business, right? And you laying out the frameworks, you don't know nothing. They sent you over here. The British, the crown did, to set up an outpost. Okay. And this is not Britain. This is a different environment. It's a new environment. You need labor force, you need product, you need to show profits, you need to send back things back to the homeland. There's all this stuff going on. So they in their board meetings, according to what I'm hearing, trying to figure out how not to have the employees, quote unquote, take over them, and how to make sure that they could, to me, skim off the top so that when they're sending back what they need to send back, they also can build themselves up over here. To me, because eventually they end up doing that. So to me, this is subjective, but there had to be a certain level of, man, how we gonna make it here? You know what I mean? I'm thinking not to go back. For those who just joined us, welcome to the conversation. We're going to jump down to what time we at? 1. All right. Baker's Rebellion. Baker's Rebellion. What's on the screen, if you've never seen it before, I'll put the link in the box. These are the laws. These are the fundamental laws that went into the construction of the West, namely North America, and some of these are what set all of them really is what set the framework for what we're experiencing today. We have now, it's 400 years later, and a lot of this stuff is still a problem. If someone has to run on the first Black president or the first woman Black president, if that's something that you're running on today, that would indicate that this is an anomaly. This is not normal. This is out of the context of what could be expected. So why would something like that? Because that's the way the thing did set up. Well, I'm going to share this. If anybody would like to share their thoughts on what we just read. Let me know if you knew some of this stuff already. What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? I'm going to put the link in the box. I'm giving you all the references here. Oh, no, wait. Yeah, that's the link in the box. Yep, that's what we're going to go into now. That law was passed because working Blacks and whites together had a revolt, and the slave driver didn't like the revolter, said we're doing the same. Right. This is what we're going to go into now. It's kind of similar to what just happened the other day with the what you call it, with the union going on strike, the dock workers. You have all different nationalities, but they're united by the way what they use to work, what they're doing, right? And so it didn't matter if this person was Black and this person was white and this person was Spanish. They were all advocating for better wages on the docks. You notice that joint cleared up real quick. People were bracing themselves like, yo, it cleared up real quick because there ain't nothing coming or going in this country if them docks are not open. And that goes back to what I was sharing. In the beginning of this country, they were known for production. That's why it's called the triangle slave trade. Right? So things were coming, raw materials were coming out of the country. The country was producing. This is how, and a lot of people tend to forget that the South was richer than the North. The Eastern Seaboard was developed first, as we see, but when they depleted the resources and the soil, literally from cash cropping all day long, they started to go further south, right? And taking up more land and taking away more land. But they were heavy producers of raw materials that were sent then overseas. So that this is how a lot of wealth flowed into the South. That's another story for another day. It's always been about economics. Always been about economics. I put the link in the box. I'm trying to decide if we're going to come back and go over that. I think we are. We'll come back. I'm not going to take 4 days again, but I had got caught up in this health education homework that I'm doing. But we're going to come back and talk about Baker's Rebellion, nice and fresh from the top, right? And continue to explore this invention of white people. Game says slavery was also to make the Black inferior in 1740. Negro law of South Carolina. Yeah, I mean, well, they had to a certain degree, change your status to justify what they were doing, right? There had to be a level of a status change. You can't in right enslave a free man who has language, rights, culture, and right in another place. So then you have to now justify. And one of the persons who justified this and kind of gave the edict that really broke the slave trade in the mid to late 1400s was a pope. And it's interesting because I was just going over with the youth them, learning about world leaders, and I'm like, you see that guy right there? That pope right there is the pope, and I'm gonna share it right now. But we're gonna go into the Baker's Rebellion in the next episode. But I kind of wanted to speak on how the status was changed to justify certain behaviors. Pope Nicholas, his name is the fifth, and slavery. If you look up Pope Nicholas V and slavery, you will begin to see that there was some stuff going on. I'm going to pull it up here. So, African laborers for a new empire, Iberia, slavery, and the Atlantic world. Y'all don't get me to start talking about this. This topic right here is it's important, crucial. All right. So this is an interesting article, as well as many other articles, but they kept trying to go to the Pope, who was supposed to be this religious ruler and leader, right, of which the people are taking their orders from during this time. And again, Portugal really is the first one to expand, as it's saying, into Africa, because after they stopped fighting with them one another, they was like, oh yeah, we got some ship technology, let's go ahead and sail down the west coast and come back. So they started sailing down to the west coast of Africa. I'll read a little bit. With Portugal's expansion into Western Africa in the 15th century, Iberian merchants began to recognize the economic potential of a large-scale slave trafficking empire. Remember the other day I was talking about the slave routes were no different. That was the roads that they used during their trade routes. It's the same routes. So all the time they was trading, going for spices, doing this, trading salt and gold and everything along these routes. Okay. It says one of the first records to this sentiment, according to the Portuguese royal chronicler Gomez Yanez de Zurara, was a young ship captain named Antam Goncalves, who sailed to West Africa in 1441. So mid 1400s, hoping to acquire sealskins and oil. After obtaining his cargo, Goncalves called a meeting of the 21 sailors who accompanied him and unveiled his plan to increase their profits. Never satisfied. Just never satisfied. Not like you don't got your own yard that you need to be at. No. You want to increase profits more, and more, right? Let me continue. So, according to the storyline, this guy is like, yeah, man, follow me, right? According to Zorara, Goncalves told his crew, we have already got our cargo, but how fair a thing would it be if we who had come to this land for a cargo of such pretty merchandise were to meet with good fortune and bring the first captives before the presence of our prince. I mean, the dudes was probably, they were still down there. I mean, people in Africa in different tribes were still doing the most, right? They were still down there doing the most among themselves. But now this is the outside, they're coming to now capitalize off of them doing the most, because there was inside tribal war. Because if there wasn't, then how did it succeed, right? Anyway, it says that night, I keep calling Convalis, Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Led a raiding party into Cap Blanc, a narrow peninsula between Western Sahara and Mauritania, kidnapped two Berbers, one man, one woman, another Portuguese mariner, Nuno Tristão, and members of his crew, soon joined Goncalves. Although the raid resulted in less than a dozen captives, Zorara imagines in his account that Prince Henry of Portugal responded to this enterprise with joy, not so much for the number of captives taken, but for the prospect of other countless captives that could be taken. Y'all can read this at your own discretion. But again, after the next couple of decades, they're trying to get permission to do this on a grand scale, right? So I jumped down. So what they started doing was capturing people, bringing them back to Portugal, bringing them back to Iberia, right? At the time, that's what they started to do. It says here, according to royal chronicler Zurara, the Berbers explained that these new captives would be black and not of the lineage of Moors, but Gentiles. Thus, in 1442, Goncalves returned his Berber captives to Western Sahara, received as payment 10 enslaved sub-Saharan Africans, whom he then transported back to Portugal for resale. And that's what they started doing. At first, the trade wasn't across the sea, it was stealing people from the West Coast and taking them back to Portugal. I'm going to jump down just a little bit because this gives context. 15th century Iberian legal traditions regulated Christian treatment of Jews, Muslims, and other Christians, clearly delineating, for example, who was enslavable and who was not. So in their laws, they're like, oh no, you can't enslave that person, but you sure can enslave this person. Wordplay. It says, in contrast, the judicial status of people who did not fit these categories were more ambiguous. Legal and philosophical arguments to address the issue began to evolve during the second half of the 15th century. Who you think we could have enslaved? No, man. You know, if them are Christian, me not think we can enslave them. But if they not have no religion, we can't enslave them. This is the conversations they over there having. Once Portuguese mariners began to return to Iberia with captives acquired in West Africa and West Central Africa, notably, the treatment of Black Gentiles, quote unquote, was addressed in 1452 and 1455 when Pope Nicholas V, this guy, issued a series of papal bulls. Basically, I decree. Yo, this history is crazy. That granted Portugal the right to enslave sub-Saharan the right to enslave sub-Saharan Africans. So this Pope, because they tried it before, and the Pope before was like, nah, bruh, I'm not getting into that. I forgot his name. He was like, nah. So they waited till he died. And he came back again. And Pope Nicholas is like, bet. So it says that granted Portugal the right to enslave sub-Saharan Africans. Church leaders argued that slavery served as a natural deterrent and Christianizing influence to, quote, barbarous, end quote, behavior among pagans. So I've read it. I think they're going to give you a little bit down here where they're giving you what their definition of who is enslavable is. And that's also why they try to the native, like Indians, for lack of, you know, the when they first came across, they were trying to convert them because they had all of these rules and frameworks that they made up of who was enslavable and who was not. But if they decreed that the person was totally barbarous, then they had free reign according to their own selves. Using this logic, the Pope issued a mandate to the Portuguese king, Alfonso V, and instructed him. This is the instruction. Y'all ready? To invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and to reduce their person to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, to convert them to his and their use and profit. And they're saying, here is the paper bull. Interesting stuff. So with the swipe of a pen, Holmesy was like, you know what? I dub thee. An official letter, right? So yeah, I just want to share that in context of what later comes on. The same way in which laws were enacted by people sitting around thinking, yeah, you know what, I decree this, that, and that. It's coming from even an earlier time. And again, this, to be fair, kingdoms have done this throughout history, but this one is done specifically for what we're still experiencing in today's space and time. So I kind of wanted to share that because I always found that interesting. I always found that interesting. I put the link in the box. Let me see what's going on here, and then I'm going to wind down. It's all interconnected. What's also is that later on, as I've said before, and as we already know, some of us and some who don't, here we are, we're learning together, is that the English who we're reading about now, who colonizes America for 200 years, because we see the papal bull goes out in 14, what did we just read? 1440? What did I just read? 1455, right? In the 1450s. The British doesn't enter the trade until the 1600s, because at this time, the Portuguese has a monopoly on the trade. And later the Spanish, a monopoly, right? They were literally dividing up. I mean, when you see this stuff, it is so crazy. They were literally they were forming companies whose responsibility it was. I'm laughing, but it's not funny. Who signed contracts, like how you see people sign music deals today, and you see people sign athletic deals today. They were signing deals that guaranteed that they alone had the right to acquire slaves from a certain region. And in addition to that, they had to stay. That's why sometimes they would be docked in the water for months, waiting for more people to be stolen, because they would have to wait until their quota was filled before they can take off. So if and it was called acentos de negros, these contracts that they were getting, so that they say, hey, you can't leave because you have to deliver 2,000 slaves, or you have to deliver 500 slaves, and you have to account for this perishable goods, essentially this amount. Like, they were shipping bananas. Like, it was crazy. It was crazy. There were industries that were formed, banking industries, the insurance industry, especially in England, was, when it became that time, they were insuring slave ships. And that, like how these athletes today and these people in these spaces today, they'll insure, if it's their voice, they use it, they'll insure their voice, or they'll insure their leg. They was insuring people, slaves, in that way, that if something happens, they get to collect insurance money. Like this thing, let me just read these comments and go ahead and boogie, because it's curious. It's also very curious. So they were insuring stolen goods, essentially. You stole the goods, insured the goods, and then if something happened to the goods in transit, You got paid for the goods that you stole. Mm, mm, mm. Still to this day, yep. That's the still to this day. It's still to this day. That's why I'm saying this stuff is important to know, because then you will understand that nothing much has changed. Still to this day. Kaya says social construct has become a pretty little word. It's not a pretty little word. It's a concept that was challenged or misunderstood. So we're exploring it. So therefore, we have to say it so that we can all become familiar with it, so that it doesn't, make the conversation go left when it's brought up, because that's exactly, again, not only is race a social construct, many other things are as well. So I don't think it's about whether or not it's it's true or not. We're exploring what it is before we can determine whether or not we agree with what it's being said it is. If we don't have a working definition, then how are we going to determine whether or not the working definition is true or not? That's just my thoughts. I'm just reading. I think Kaya came in a little later. Maybe you would listen a little bit earlier, or get the book or read it, or you know what I'm saying? Just get more information on why this is important to the history of this country. That's what is in. It's not about physical black, white, brown. Why is this information important to the history of this country, and why is it important to what we are experiencing today? That, to me, that this is how we got to this particular conversation. I've been having this conversation, but how in recent times we got here was because these things were brought up as it relates to who is and who isn't, right? So I like to go like beyond the problem so that I can understand how we got to this point. So that's what that is about. Game said, and by King Dennis of Portugal, have in his will shows that Moors are synonymous to slaves and unfree. Okay. Leah says that her point is race was made to create the division we are seeing today, and we have to move past that ideology and pain that race baiting still causes. Yeah, it clearly is causing, exactly. Clearly, it's causing a divide, because the moment you say this person ain't black, the whole place, or this person is white, it's like, okay, what is going on here? It's still used today. That means it still has validity. That means, why shouldn't we discuss it? Right? Why shouldn't we have a working definition of what we are refuting? Whether you agree or you don't agree, all I'm doing is giving the history of it. So, I didn't write the book, not this one. I did write Island Twist though, so go ahead and check that one out on Amazon today. I also wrote a book, Angry Black Woman. I wrote it like back in 2016. And again, like I shared before, in that book, I explore again how race is used to bait people, how race is used to devise people, how this social construct here is used and weaponized. And all we're doing now is looking even before, Jim Crow and before the minstrel shows. And we're going to look at the foundation of the country, and essentially looking at the fact that it was designed for something, and it is still being used for what it is designed for. So if you know something is designed for something and it's being used for something, why are we still getting caught in it? Why are we still why are you still falling for the okie doke? It's like, it's there. This is what it's going to be used for. So why are you still falling for the okie doke? How are you still falling for the okie doke? Why? There's a thing about dealing with whatever is personal. And I think from what I've explored, a lot of this is personal that we're projecting on to our experience in history. So we're arguing not from what historically is what we can look up objectively about what has happened. We're projecting, we're coloring it with what our experiences are, and this is part of the problem. You know what I mean? This is part of the problem. Today, I am reading from the book Birth of a White Nation, The Invention of White People and Its Relevance Today by Jacqueline Battalora, not by Imuna. This book is exploring the history, right? So this history, me never did it, but them write it down, so we are read it. Again, for those who just joined us, I'm gonna go ahead and wind down. Next time we come, we're gonna talk about Bacon's rebellion and how a lot of this is a lot of this has been, written into law, and it contributes to what the people experience and still experience up until this day. So hopefully that was helpful. I was stuttering a little bit today because I'm tired. But I said, you know what? Let me come on, because if I don't, that's going to be another day that I did not follow up on this conversation. So with that said, I pray everybody have a blessed night. I think I shared all of the links in the box. This Papal Bull one is wild. It's wild. These jokers said invade and vanquish. What in the world, son? All right, everybody. I don't know. Kaya, the mic is open. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how any of this has anything to do with what I'm reading. That's why I say sometimes when the conversation, we can't even just finish the sentence. Me not understand what any of this have to do with I'm reading. I don't understand. Am I missing the point? Let me read back and see what the conversation was supposed to be about. The invention of white people is the name of the conversation. I don't understand what this has to do with what that was like 5 conversations ago. We're currently reading and coming on the same page with a topic so that we can move from that. I don't understand what any of this other stuff has to do with it. Lala Tov, everybody. Yeah, sometime, Yo, Kaya, I don't understand. I don't understand why you're not on tonight's topic. Tonight's topic is birth of the white nation, how this came into being in American law. That is what we're talking about. I gave American law. I'm not talking about feelings and idea. I'm giving American law. I'm talking about history, 1600s. I gave Papal Bull 1400s, what broke the entire slave trade and started it. I don't understand why we are not moving forward. I don't understand why we're not moving forward with this conversation. It's late now too. But anywho, hopefully we will. Oh, okay. He says he's responding to Leah. That's what I say. Me not understand. Did I miss something? Did I miss something? I'm like, what is going on here? Okay, people. So he was responding to Leah. So that, but yes, for those who are just joining us, definitely check out those links because they make great conversation starters. They make great conversation starters, and it helps us to get a better picture of the why the climate is thus, right? And without healing the original sin, and if that is even possible today, I know people may say yes or no. We can't heal what we don't understand. And I find all too often that people on all sides, unless you make this a priority, you just skip over it, you know? Yeah, slavery. Slavery was it's a whole study unto itself. You know what I mean? It's not something that if should be or can be skipped over or just broad brushed, because there's so many components to it that to understand today is to understand what has happened and to know that some people never forgot. Only some people who got disconnected from the history, other people never forgot. Oh, thank you, Queenie. Because I was like, huh? How did we get back over there? I don't know. All right, everybody. Guess what? We're gonna wind down. Give thanks for coming through. Don't worry. We're gonna come back to other topics soon. But again, bear with me as I try to go back over some of these topics and tie up these loose ends. But with that said, yeah, let's be respectful also in the comment section. That's one of the things when we come over here, we learn, we grow, but let's be respectful. Let's be respectful, please. All right, then, people. Continue the conversation respectfully in the comment section below. I'm going to go ahead and boogie the conversation. Me no want cut you off, but the conversation, the mic is open if you guys wanted to come instead of the typing thing. And things can be misconstrued in text. That's why I, always open the mic so that you can hear the voice, you can hear who's talking, you can hear how they sound, you can hear how they come in. Because sometimes, text could throw things off. So just for future reference, you know what I mean? Click the link. Oh, look at that. Kaya says he meant no offense. And everybody is blessed. All right, great, lovely. That's how we have conversation. I know we can boogie. All right, everybody have a blessed night.